Hi, I'm Zoe Migel. I'm an autism specialist and have worked with young children with autism for 22 years. There is a ton to cover, and so I'm going to go ahead and get started. If people join somewhere along the line, I'll just do my best to let them in, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to get through a lot of information. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm on Zoom and streaming through Facebook Live. It's a big topic, and so I'm going to kind of just focus it on going through the actual IEP and how each section of the IEP builds on each other. There's Jocelyn. Oh, it's so fun. Everybody's coming on. Hi, Jocelyn. I see you there. So as we go through it, I'm really going to just go through each of the parts and talk about how they build on each other and why each piece is important. There are some tips just in terms of being prepared for the IEP that I think are really important, especially for so many of our families that are Spanish speaking or speak another language altogether. So that is that the school is required to provide an interpreter. So whether that be Spanish, Vietnamese, Mandarin, whatever the case, that the school is required to provide all of the information as best they can in the primary language of the family that is going to be attending the IEP. The other thing that I think is really helpful is to have a copy of the evaluations prior to going into the IEP. It's something that I'm really trying to advocate for so that the family or whoever is supporting the family has the ability to review those reports prior to going into the IEP. Most of the time, it will say at the end whether services are recommended or not. And so that allows the family and whoever is supporting the family to go in and really have a sense of we are in line with what the school is thinking in terms of the services that are needed for this child, or we're not. And so we're going to have to go in and have a discussion about why the family thinks these services are needed for the child to access their educational environment, and why the school doesn't. So having those evaluations on the front end are really helpful. A lot of the times the IEPs that I do are at the very beginning, right? So I work mostly with kids that are very little. And so the work that I do are kids that are moving from early intervention and just starting their lives in the public school system. But I think many of the folks here have older children or are working with older children. And so this will apply as well. And I'll try to really make it relevant in terms of this being the initial IEP and or an IEP that actually the family is coming back for, let's say, an annual, or there's some reason why the family has called an IEP prior to the time that IEP expires. Okay, so trying to make the IEP relevant for whomever it is that's here. We have both parents and providers. I'm thrilled to have everybody here. And with that, I will get things started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through an IEP. This is just a template. It's not specific to any district. And I think that that's helpful because each district, right, if you're in Albuquerque or Santa Fe or Espanola, their IEPs are going to look a little bit different, but the content is the same because it's mandated mostly by the federal government, but also by the state. So the components of it are going to be the same regardless of what it looks like. Okay, so I will bring this up and hopefully everybody will be able to see it. I'm pretty sure that everybody can see this on Facebook Live. I'm hoping that that's the case. I'm looking, and it actually doesn't seem like that's what people are seeing. Oh, there it goes. The Facebook Live is a little bit delayed, so great. So everybody can see this. And again, this is just a template. So when we begin the IEP, the big picture is that the public school system is mandated by IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. They are mandated by federal law to provide three things: that when a child graduates from school, that child is ready for further education, whatever that may look like, that child, they're not a child anymore, but a young adult is ready for employment, and they're ready to live independently. So this is the piece, right? This is the plan that is heading that child in that direction. And so each annual IEP is so important because, again, it's heading that child towards that graduation date, that they're ready for further education, whatever that may look like, to get a job and to live independently as best they can. So, so this is just demographic information, right? Student's name and that kind of thing. I'm going to actually come down here. So this is the vision statement. I'll go back up above because that's how the child qualifies. But this is the vision statement. Like, what are your goals? Oftentimes, whoever's facilitating the IEP will say, what are your goals? What do you envision for your child? And I really encourage families to talk about that big picture, like when their kiddo is an adult, or if I know that there are actually a number of people here who work with foster care and adoption. So whomever it is that that child is in their care, what is their vision for that child? And a lot of parents will say, like, I want them to get married. I want them to be happy, right? I want them to live independently, those kind of things. But it really is that very big picture. And I really encourage families to think about that. So that sets the tone. It tells everybody, hey, this IEP is moving towards a larger goal, which is graduation and my child being able to be independent and be successful. Okay, so I'm going to go back up here a little bit. And this is the area where it's decided by the team, the IEP team, under what exceptionality a child qualifies for special education services. This is sometimes really clear and sometimes gets a little muddy, but really the IEP team comes to a consensus whether that child qualifies under autism, developmental delay, other health impaired, and so forth. So this is where we talk about that primary disability or exceptionality. There are 13 of them. So that's the first piece of qualifying. Again, if we're talking about an annual IEP, the child still has to qualify, but it is, I think, much more of a formality in general. So, but the child has to qualify with an exceptionality. And then also the team has to decide whether that disability or exceptionality is impacting that child's ability to access the educational environment. So it's kind of two pieces that have to be met, two requirements that have to be met for a child to qualify for special education services. So they have to have a primary disability, one of the 13 exceptionalities, and then the team has to decide whether that exceptionality is impacting their ability to access their educational environment. They need special instruction and related services and so forth. So once that's decided, right, and usually that's called an EDT or an eligibility determination meeting, then you move into the IEP, the plan, right? The plan that is going to support that child throughout the year to access their educational environment. So I want to talk for just a quick second about the IEP team. So there are, again, mandates from the federal government in terms of who needs to be at that meeting. And it's required that there is the parent as best as able. There are situations where if the school reaches out and reaches out and reaches out, they can have the IEP without the parent, but they really have to show that they have made a very, very strong effort to get that parent there. So the parent, a general education teacher, a special education teacher, if there is any type of health issues, the nurse, in order to create that health plan, an administrator, so that there's somebody there that can actually decide in the moment whether something is acceptable, that the team doesn't have to say, gosh, we have to go and talk to the administrator to find out whether, we can sign off on this or that sort of thing. And the related services, service providers. So all of those people have to be there. If sometimes people do dual role, but it's always good to have those people, because those people are really important to provide input and expertise in designing that IEP. And if they're not there, then that gets harder when you're talking about services or goals or that kind of thing. So those are mandated people. If one of those roles isn't there, the parent can say, yes, that's okay with me. I'm willing to continue with this IEP process. If people leave the meeting, it's actually the parent has to give permission. So the parent really should be in this very solid place at the head of the table in terms of their role at the IEP meeting. Now, again, I'm talking about parent, it could be whomever it is that child is in their care. The family is also allowed to bring anybody that they want to come to that meeting. And I really suggest that parents don't go to these meetings alone, that they have either fellow, another caretaker or an advocate or a teacher in terms of early intervention, that they have their early intervention team go. It's really intimidating. And so I like parents to kind of feel like they have some folks that are having their back. So that's the IEP team. And once the child qualifies, all those folks get together and start to design this plan. So again, this first part is long-term goals, and they talk about community participation, recreation and leisure, independent living, and again, and post-secondary training. And this is there because of those three things that are promised, right? Independent living, ready for further education, and to independent living, work, and further education. Okay, so in the beginning of the IEP, we're talking about present levels. And it's really important. This is the part where you really begin to talk about the strengths and areas of concern for the child. So if, for example, there is a speech communication challenge, or let's say we're talking about autism, this is the part where you really start to define these are the strengths and these are the areas that this child is going to need some support in, again, in order to access that educational environment. And these are kind of big picture. Sometimes the IEPs will lump it all together, kind of big picture and present levels in terms of the academic piece and the school-based piece. In this one, they've separated the two out. So again, we're looking at these skills, career awareness, recreation, leisure, and community participation. As the child gets older, this becomes a little bit clearer. When they're little, sometimes it's like, do they have an interest, and how might this manifest itself when they're big? But that's the idea of this. Okay. Then we start talking about the concerns and recommendations in terms of more specific, so motor development, health considerations, and any additional information that the team would want to consider. A lot of times, again, this just is sort of evaluations and those sort of things that would go into the conversation of what sort of accommodations does this child need? What are the services that this child is going to need? What type of learning environment, right? What is going to be that least restrictive environment for that child? So this is the basis of all of the decisions along those lines. It's really important. Sometimes you'll walk into an IEP meeting and all of a sudden there's discussion about what classroom the child is going to be in, who the teacher is, what services are going to be provided. And I really recommend that the IEP go through the process so that everything doesn't get sort of mushed together. Because if there's disagreement, then you want to be able to go back to those strengths and areas of concern to be able to kind of hash out what sort of where things should fall, right? If the family thinks that the child should get speech and language and the school doesn't, then you can go back to those present levels and say, yeah, but this child doesn't have, I'll talk about little ones, right? This child has no language, right? This child has 2 or 3 words. Okay, well then it's going to be hard for the school to then say, well, we don't recommend speech and language services, right? So this is where you really kind of prepare that argument for what the parent or what the team really believes that this child is going to need to access that educational environment. So that's that. Okay, so consideration of special factors, obviously visual impairment, if the child needs any sort of accommodation specific to that, oral or written communication needs. This one is sort of handled differently in districts. Sometimes if the child needs augmentative technology or that sort of thing, that would go here. It doesn't usually relate if the child just needs speech and language support. Obviously, if the student is deaf or hard of hearing, that would lead to specific accommodations. Does the student have limited English proficiency? That would be in the case, like a lot of our families, they speak Spanish, right? So this would be an area that you would click yes, and then there would be a discussion about how to support that child in accessing their educational environment based on that information. Assistive technology, this one, in general, this one's a tough one because there has to be an assessment for that augmentative technology to really decide whether or not assistive technology is needed. But if it is, obviously, then that would be a yes. Discipline, this is a tricky section. So oftentimes, if a child is going from early intervention into the public school system, a lot of times discipline is just redirection, right? There's not a lot of often disciplinary concerns when they're really little, depending on the school environment, right? If there's any concern, you want to make sure that that these are noted as the student is not going to follow the school-wide discipline plan. A student cannot be expelled, suspended, consequenced if that behavior is related to their disability. So this is a really important protection. Like, I work with kids with autism, and a lot of times just getting to school is a challenge, right? And so if that child is following the regular discipline plan and they are tardy X amount of times, or they don't show up X amount of times, it's a referral for educational neglect. And so it would be really important to talk about that here so that that isn't a problem. So that would not be a child who would follow the school-wide discipline plan. If there are specific concerns that actually need a formal plan to address, this is where that would be noted, right? So you'd have the functional behavioral assessment, behavior intervention plans, those kind of things. This is where that would be noted. So this piece is often just gone through, check, 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 and then it's only really noted after the fact. Oh my goodness, like we said that the child should follow the school-wide discipline plan, and we didn't really understand what the implications of that might be. I'm going through this super fast. It's a lot of information. All of this will be recorded. I'll repost it on Facebook. It also will go to my YouTube channel, and I will give everybody that information to be able to follow up if you want to watch this again. It'll be recorded and saved. Okay, so that is discipline. And then here's where we really start to get into the meat of academic needs, right? So this really, again, comes from that conversation earlier in terms of present levels, areas of strength, areas of concern. And that is pulled directly to here, right? Identified areas of need are going to come from that initial conversation of that child's strengths and areas that need support. And again, student and parent input, sometimes it can be pulled directly from the conversation before, and sometimes there's further discussion that happens here. It is really important that parents feel like, or caretakers feel like, they have a say. They're the ones that know their children best. Those of you who did early intervention, a lot of this language for me comes from that, of, you know, parents being the drivers, parents knowing their children best, and really being empowered to advocate for their children. So this is a place that they can really say, this is an area I'm concerned about, and this is the kind of support that my child needs, or this is why I'm concerned about that. So again, just sort of focuses those areas of concern down a little bit more. And that goes on a bit here. It's all the same idea. Extended school year. Now, this is an area, extended school year is basically a summer program that goes beyond the regular year. So here in Santa Fe, for example, it's a 6-week program that is offered to kids that the concern is that they will lose skill, or it will take a long time, and that they will lose skill that then will take a long time to recoup. And so the idea is to have them as best we can in year-round school, so that they don't have that loss of skill, and then again need that time to catch up during the school year. So extended school year is offered when they have data that the child has regressed and wasn't able to sort of recoup those skills. In IDEA, in the actual law, that's a little, it's a little bit grayer than that. So my guess is that each district has kind of how they run their extended school year program. And parents just have to decide whether that's something that is really valuable for their child. For example, if it's not done at the school that the child normally goes to, if it's all ages, kind of getting a better idea of what that extended school year looks like. So then the parent can decide whether that's something that is actually going to be beneficial. I always recommend that parents say yes, right? So if the school is offering it, great. And then they can decide whether that's something that they want to avail themselves of. I would also say that if that extended school year does not meet the child's needs, and the child really needs that year-round schooling, that you go back to the table and talk a little bit more about what this extended school year looks like, so it actually is beneficial to the child and actually is doing what it's intended to do, which is to support kids who need that year-round schooling, and that are either going to lose skills or not continue to bring skills on as needed. Participation in mandated assessments. I have to be really honest, this is not an area that I know a whole lot about, because I'm usually doing that early intervention piece. But what I would say is that many kids who have IEPs, that testing is like the school environment on steroids, right? It's high pressure, it's timed. I would say that a lot of kids need this support. I would not let the school say that the child won't get tested, right? Or even necessarily alternative testing, unless it's really needed, right? Because we want to make sure that the child is moving towards their peers, right? That is catching up, or is on par with their peers despite their disability. This IEP, the goal of it should really be moving that child as best as that child is able towards functioning with their typical peers. And I think this is one of the things, like this idea of making the most of the IEP. I find that there's sometimes that IEPs, they're exactly the same year after year after year, and go back 2 years, 3 years. It's the same goals, it's the same accommodations. And that really tells me that either the IEP is not capturing that progress, or that this IEP is not functional, right? It's not doing what it should be doing. People aren't being held accountable for making sure that the child is meeting their goals. Because if it's the same year after year after year, when they get to be a senior in high school, they are not going to be ready for further education, living independently, and to get a job, right? So I think tests are really important because it tells us whether the child is making progress and how they're comparing to their peers. And it's just a piece of information for sure, but I do think that it's helpful. This might be something to to talk to the school advocate or talk to somebody who's got more information. Most schools will have advocates that parents can talk to. Again, I just have to be honest and say that I'm just not really clear, especially as kids get older, how this fits into the IEP process. Okay, instructional accommodations and or modifications. So this is the area that the team begins to really tease out. What are the environmental accommodations? How does the environment need to be designed to support this child's ability to access the educational environment, access what is happening around them in a meaningful way? So one of them is the environment. So that might be things like reducing, the amount of visuals in the classroom, making sure that the lighting is not overwhelming, things like that. Instructional materials, like a child may need a lot of manipulatives. I think the Santa Fe school district, particularly with early intervention and with kids who have a diagnosis of autism, they do a really great job of packing this area with best practice interventions and with accommodations that we know are really helpful to kids on the spectrum. And so I think one of the things that's important for parents to know, that if this is filled out, that they can cherry pick, right? They can go through and say, yeah, I think that'll be helpful. No, I don't think that'll be helpful. That we've tried before, that wasn't helpful. So these are really meaningful so that when a teacher comes and reads the IEP, that they know, oh, these are the things, right? It's going to be really helpful for Sarah to sit really close to me, right? She's going to be in one of those desks, one of those seats really close to me. Maybe a child needs to have a quiet space, that when they start to get overwhelmed, they have a space that they can go to and kind of calm down. There also may be things that aren't here that the parent is going to know is really helpful. So just take an example like headphones, right? So headphones are one of the things that can be really helpful for kids who are overwhelmed with noise. A lot of kids who are overwhelmed with noise have other sensory concerns, and they're not going to wear those headphones. So it's not always what's best practice in general is not always best practice for a child. Student response mode. Sometimes kids need a time to process. Sometimes they need to be able to respond in ways that are not verbal, right? Instructional strategies. Sometimes kids need things written down. Sometimes kids need things modeled for them. Sometimes kids need other kids to take notes for them, right? There's just a lot of strategies that can be included here. Homework assignments. There's some kids that can't manage the amount of homework but really we want to be checking for mastery. And so maybe they just do 3 problems instead of 10, right? Testing, this is where you would say, you know, it's untimed, or my child needs more time, or you know, my child needs to be in a separate room, or my child needs to have the questions read to them. So depending on what the child's, again, strengths and areas that need support, these are what accommodations would come from that. And again, I just want to go back to this idea of making the most out of the IEP. This is why all of that conversation about strengths and areas that need support is critical, because when we start to talk about these accommodations, then I'm often at the IEP table, but the family really has something to go back to and say, for example, my child needs an iPad with some sort of communication system. I talked to a family earlier today, and the mom's like, my child has severe childhood apraxia. Nobody can understand her. The school will not provide her with anything, right? So if all of that information is shared up above, when we're talking about strengths and areas that need support, when we come down here, we talk about accommodations, the school is going to have a hard time making the argument of a child who nobody understands why that child wouldn't get that that additional iPad and communication system. So those are the things that, you know, when I'm talking about sort of making the most out of an IEP, is really sort of taking the deep dive in terms of what are the supports this child is going to need to be able to succeed at school. Okay, so again, these are all going to be pretty specific to the child. What I just encourage all of you, whether you're a parent or somebody that's supporting a parent, is that if you come in and these are blank, have them share with you what are some of the accommodations that might support the specific child, given their areas of strength or needs of support. If you come in and this is all filled out, make sure that you go through them so that they are specific to the kiddo. Cherry pick. That one works, that one doesn't, that one works, etc. And again, the parent or the person who knows this child best is going to really help in this area to really be able to design those accommodations for that child that's meaningful, right? The teacher wants to know this stuff. Grades will be based on, in case of a failing grade. I think this is particularly important as kids get older, that there are, you know, to really be clear what that communication is going to look like. And sometimes the schools are great. Sometimes the classroom teacher is great. And so the need for specificity in this doesn't seem that important. But really, it's so important that it actually is written down. So even if your relationship with the teacher is fabulous and you know, the teacher like covers all bases, make sure that it is all spelled out. So if that teacher goes away, or if you move, or, you know, regardless of what happens, you have an IEP that is really going to support that child, and everything is documented. Okay. Measurable goals. So this is an area that's difficult because not a lot of people know how to write goals well. And that, you know, parents, there's no, you know, why should we know, right? There's no booklet that tells us any of this. But even people that are in the school system oftentimes don't know how to write meaningful goals. There is, there's a booklet that's IEP goals, and there's a acronym that's SMART. I can't remember right now what that stands for, but it's basically that first you identify the area of need, right? So let's say it's communication skills. Then they reference the standard. So generally there's like an overarching goal, right? By the end of the year, Sarah will be able to use her words to request engage with peers, and navigate her school effectively, using verbal communication. So let's just say that's the overarching one. And then you would talk about the specific strategies, the specific smaller goals, objectives or benchmarks that the child is going to need to meet to be able to reach that overarching goal for the year. So what I really recommend in a goal is that, one, you identify kind of what's the setting. So in the classroom, in the classroom, on the playground, wherever it is that goal is going to be observed, right? What that goal is specifically, what is the observable behavior? That child is going to use 3-word sentences during engagement with peers, right? So you can actually see, okay, did she use 3-word sentences while she was engaged with a peer? So it's actual observable behavior. And then how you're going to measure it, right? So is it 4 out of 5 opportunities? Is it, over a day? Is it in an hour? Kind of how is it going to be measured? And the reason for this is we need to know whether a child is making progress towards those goals. We don't want to get to the end of the year and be like, oh, well, she didn't meet it, and on to the next annual IEP where it's just going to be the same IEP again, right? So we need a way to talk about, measure, take data regarding a goal to make sure that that child is making the progress they need to make to have to meet that goal at the end of the year. So this is where all of those goals are going to be noted. And again, these goals are going to be related, going back to the child's areas of strength. I'm going back here, right? Identified areas of need. So the idea is those goals are going to support the areas that child needs support. So at the end of the year, right, if we had that magic wand, those skills would now be on board for that child, for them to then progress to the next year and be able to succeed in that next year for them. Okay. So do you see how, I'm hoping that everybody kind of sees how all of this conversation builds on each other, and how you really can't have a conversation about accommodations or goals without having been very specific about what that child's areas of strength are, and what are the areas that they need support. Okay. All right. Goals. And they're going to be in each area. So like there'll be a communication goal, there'll be maybe a classroom goal, there might be OT goal, etc. And sometimes they're goals that everybody works on. So if there's an OT speech, that they will actually both be on a specific goal. Okay. Transition planning. So this, for the little ones, isn't that, well, we just don't really talk about this. But for kids that are older, this, and again, this is just not my area of specialty, but I know that like you have to start at like 14, right? To begin to plan for how that child is going to graduate out of school. And there really needs to be very specific, right, who's responsible, time frame, date of completion, because now the heat is on, right? They've got 3 years or 4 years, they being the school district, to make sure that that child is ready for work, is ready to be independent in the community, live independently, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really the plan that is going to make sure that there is a strategic plan to get that child to the point where they can graduate, and the promise of special education has been met. If that child is not ready for further education, living independently, and work, the school system has failed that child. I feel very, very strongly. There are all sorts of supports in place. Every IEP should be moving towards that. It is really unacceptable if a child gets to their senior year and is not ready. And so the hope is that these IEPs are designed well to be able to support a child to get to that point. The DD waiver and SSI, I'm really happy that now this is part of the IEP, because the DD waiver takes forever. I don't know. My area of specialty is autism, and so I know for the most part, the DD waiver is something that families should at least apply for. They may not need it. I think it's like 13 years to get on the waiver. I think every state does it a little bit differently. But in this state, it's a very, very long wait. And so as soon as we can encourage families to get on that wait list, the better. I also think that at this point, they are, because the wait is so long, they are providing some services even for kids who are on that wait list. And so the school really wants to make sure that they support families to get on that list. Medical significant health information. Again, sometimes kids need health plans if they have allergies or any other thing that would involve a nurse to help support that child is really, this is where that would go, a health plan. Let's see, health plan. Emergency evacuation plan. Again, this is one of these pieces that just kind of gets checked. And it's really important, especially these days when we're doing like shelter in place. It kind of breaks my heart. But, fire drills and those kind of things, a lot of kids need support. It can be very stressful. If kids have backgrounds of trauma and abuse, that kind of intensity, especially if it really is a shelter-in-place situation or a fire drill where they have to get everybody out really fast. It is, sorry, I'm just letting people in as they come. This can be a place where really a plan needs to be in place. If you have a child who's a flight risk, really, really important that there is an actual plan in place that has to be implemented. Sometimes there will be like, oh, well, we take care of all the kids. It's just, like, we'll take care of them. It's just covered. And I really recommend that if the child's team feels like there needs to be a plan and the school is, for whatever reason, saying they don't want to do it, make sure that that's in the prior written notice. And we'll get to that at the very end. Because if anything happens, God forbid, knock on wood, right? If anything happens, it's documented that there was clear communication from that child's team that an emergency plan was needed, and the school declined. The school rejected it. So this, again, is just something that can be checked off without a lot of conversation. And I think that for a lot of kids who have IEPs, it's important. So mobility, this would be really for a kiddo who, for instance, has a wheelchair or that kind of thing. I don't know if older kids, whether this would be like a kiddo where normally they would say, yeah, okay, here's your hall pass, go to the bathroom. And if this was a child that really wouldn't be acceptable for, there were concerns for whatever reason, this might be where that would go. If it's not, then I would ask, where does it go, right? If the child just needs supervision, regardless of where they are on a school campus, and this is not where it goes, I would want to know where. Transportation is pretty, evident that schools need to provide transportation for kiddos, and that's where that would go. Schedule of services. So this is where we talk about how many hours of speech and language, how many hours of OT, all of those things. And this grows out of areas of strength, areas that need support, accommodations, and goals. So these services really need to reflect what are the supports, right? What are the sort of human resource supports that the child is going to need to be able to meet those goals, right? To be able to implement those accommodations. So a lot of times the school will just have kind of, we offer an hour of this and an hour of this and an hour of this, or we don't offer social work, or anytime a school says, this is what we offer, we don't have the resources, we don't have the financial, right? None of those bear any weight in terms of deciding what services a child needs. The minute that the administration, and usually it's the administration, starts talking in that way, it's a big red flag to that child's team, parents, and whoever else is there to represent the child. It's a big red flag that this IEP is in danger of not being individualized. So sometimes it's a good match, right? And you kind of have to pick your battles, right? Sometimes it's fine if a child, needs just 1 hour of speech a week, and that feels like that's going to be appropriate. Great, that's not something I would argue. But let's say the child really needs that sort of social emotional help from a social worker, right? Or that child really needs a social skills group, or that child really needs support on the playground to be able to have successful peer interactions, right? And they say, well, half an hour a week of social work. Well, that's not going to be sufficient if the goal is, for that child to be able to engage in age-appropriate play with peers, right? And that child is really struggling. Half an hour of social work is not going to do it. And a lot of schools have that sort of cookie cutter, this is what we offer. And so that would be a place that whoever is there to represent the child would say, based on those areas that need support, based on the accommodations that are required, based on the goals that we've defined, a half an hour of social work is not going to be able, that social worker is not going to be able to effectively implement strategies that are going to help that child meet that goal by the end of the year. And so that's really where the discussion becomes pertinent, and there can be disagreement in terms of what that child needs. If ultimately you can't agree, this is often a place where things get tabled. So let's say that the school says, sorry, social work, that's what we offer, right? We offer half an hour. And the child's team feels like, well, it's all the team, but the child, those that are there to sort of advocate for the child, feel like that's not enough. You may just have to agree to disagree and either come back to the table at a later date, or you can request a mediated IEP, you can go to due process, those sort of things. Hopefully won't ever get there. A lot of times if you just, the team that represents the child's interest in this situation, if they just start to begin to, reflect on that really it has to be individualized and, based on the child's needs, we really hope that we can come to an agreement. Let's try at an hour. And if the child doesn't need that much, we could always cut back. So there's kind of strategies to try and get to the place where the school really is offering the level of services that child needs. So the special education related service would be noted here. Minutes per day, sort of what the frequency and duration would be. So one time a week for 60 minutes. Start date, end date. Usually this is the beginning of the IEP and, a year from that date. Service providers, sometimes they note this, sometimes they don't in terms of who the specific person is. I think in general they don't, because they can't really promise a certain person. They can just promise that those services will be provided by somebody who's licensed. Time in regular classroom, time in special education setting. So the idea is, and this moves into the next piece, which is, what's the least restrictive environment, right? What is the environment that the child can successfully be in with supports? And the federal guidelines really state that you start at where that child would be were they not to need an IEP. And then provide the supports, as much supports as necessary. If that child can be in that general ed classroom, great, with supports, great. And that's where these services would provide those supports necessary. And then you kind of move towards more restrictive. So maybe it's a smaller student-to-teacher ratio. So maybe it's a classroom where there are 3 teachers and 8 students. Maybe it's, again, then moving to a resource room. That would be like a special education setting, right? Where everybody in that room has an IEP. So the school should really offer a menu of services, a menu of options in terms of placement, like what kind of classroom that child should be in. And then the team can decide what are the services, right? What are the related services that are needed to provide that. Yeah, one-on-one aids and all that stuff. I just, it's a big conversation, and I'm up against the 3:30. I'm happy to go beyond 3:30, so I'll get through this, and then if people want to stay on after that, that's great, and I'll answer some of the questions that have come up. Okay, supplementary aids and services. That's sort of where that one-on-one piece comes on. Some districts are more amenable to one-on-ones than others. Some districts will not do it. And again, anytime they say they will not do it, that's problematic. And it really depends on what the people that are there to advocate for the child, kind of what they believe is best for the child. I will say that one-on-one aids can be complicated. So a general ed classroom for a child, that really is not an appropriate setting, that can be harmful for the child, right? That might not be what's best, even though it's least restrictive. And one-on-one aids, even though it sounds great to have a one-on-one person there, if that person isn't trained well, it actually can be problematic, because that child just ends up relating to that one-on-one aid and isn't really accessing their educational environment in the way that is intended. So it's just problematic in terms of those pieces. But these are the services that should be in place to provide support for that child to access their educational environment, and all the accommodations and plan of the IEP are implemented by those people. So this piece is super important. This is really by the school. This is sort of how they get funding. And again, I don't really level 4. It's most restrictive or highest level of support. I don't think it's really relevant to the IEP team process, to creating the IEP. It's really sort of for the administration. This least restrictive environment, again, is that environment that the child will be in, that educational environment, classroom, et cetera. And so that's why this is here. Again, all of this builds, right? We can't talk about what type of environment is going to be appropriate for this child unless we know strengths, areas that need support, accommodations that are needed, goals for the year. And it's really from that information that the conversation about what is going to be least restrictive for a child is appropriate. Sometimes it's just automatic. Kids get put in resource, or they get put in special education classrooms when it's really not appropriate. Kids need, in general, typical peers so that they can see and have good peer models to be able to learn and develop those skills necessary to kind of be up with their same age peers. So that's the least restrictive environment. There's all these questions like if they're not in the classroom, they have to explain why, and that's all good. Okay, so this is actually a good example of what often happens at an IEP team meeting. And we haven't even fleshed out any of the specifics, right? We haven't talked about a real child in terms of what their needs are and what their accommodations are. This is just me trying to get through explaining an IEP, and it's been an hour, right? And I have motored through this. So IEPs take a long time. And one of the most important pieces, which is, is this piece right here, prior written notice of proposed actions. This is like one of the most important pieces of the whole document. And it's done at the very end, and a lot of times it's not even done with the entire IEP team. So the prior written notice of proposed actions should document everything that has happened in that IEP, everything that has been proposed, by whom, whether it was accepted or rejected, right? So let's say, this should include all of the services that were recommended. If there was any disagreement, so in the example that I gave of the social work example, if the school said we offer a half an hour of social work, right? And it was proposed by the school, and the parent says, no, that's not acceptable. That's not going to provide enough support for my child to access the educational environment. Then the reason for it is put here, right? And then the parent would propose, we think an hour of social work would meet the child's needs, right? So it's going to write parent proposed it, right? And then the school is going to have to write in black and white that they rejected it and why. And this is where, they can't say we don't have the resources. They can't say this is what we normally offer. They can't say we don't have the finances. We don't have a social worker. None of those fly. If they put that in here, I would let them put it in there, because then you have black and white legal standing to go to, either file a complaint with the state or be able to go back and say, really, this is, I've done some research and really this is not an acceptable reason why my child can't get support that they need, right? That this child can't get this support. So getting everything captured here is absolutely critical. This is like the person in the courtroom that takes all the notes, right? This is like a recording of all that goes down in the IEP. And again, most of the time it's fine. It's just people talking, and the school proposes this and the family says great and it's all fabulous, right? That still should all be documented. Sometimes you leave the IEP and the parent thinks something was agreed upon and the school doesn't. And if it's not documented here in the prior written notice, then there really is hard to go back to any sort of record. This is the record. So prior written notice, super, super important. One of the things that I recommend is to parents, really to anybody, is that generally an hour is not enough to really create a plan that is substantial and meaningful in terms of supporting a child's ability to access their educational environment. It is okay for a parent or really anybody on the team to say, gosh, we all have been working really, really hard. Let's table this and come back in a week or something and finish up this IEP. It's okay to do it in two parts. It's okay if a disagreement comes up to say, let's table this for right now and let's come back. Or, the parent just says, look, I'm not going to be able to agree to this. And so you can request either a mediated IEP, a facilitated IEP. That's when somebody from the state, it's usually offered by the school. It's supposed to be somebody I roll my eyes. It's supposed to be somebody who is neutral. A lot of times They're not only because the school and that person have a lot of information and the parent is usually in the dark in terms of what language to use, how to advocate, all of those things. So hopefully this gave you all, at least a foundation with which to either step into an IEP yourselves as parents, or as people who support parents who are doing, or caretakers that are in this process, just give you a little bit of an idea of how to prepare them to walk into these meetings. I find just even going through this template with parents is helpful so that they have time to think about, like, what are the long-term goals? What are my child's strengths and areas that need support? What are the goals that I would like to see my child attain in the next year? What are the services that I think my child is going to need to be able to be successful at school? So hopefully this has given you guys some foundation to be able to step into this process. One of the things that the Santa Fe School District is doing right now, which I think is really, really helpful, is actually having these contacts. So at the end, having the people, like, if there's a disagreement, who do they talk to? Who do they go to the school if they need advocacy or parent support? Who at the state level do they contact if they're really having a problem with the school? They also should get their procedural safeguards. I find those are pretty, all the information is there. I find in general, it's not very parent friendly and is not particularly useful for families, unfortunately. If we go through it with families, or if the family has somebody to go through it, then I think it can be helpful. So that's the IEP. And really, when I'm talking about getting the most out of it, it really is like, if you build each of those pieces, there's a good chance you're going to get to the end and have a plan in place that is actually going to be able to be implemented. The teacher is going to be able to go and go, oh, this is a great plan. I know what to do. The speech, the OT, all of them are going to be like, oh, this is meaningful. And I think that's the hope for all of the kiddos that need this additional support in order to be successful at school. So let's see. So it is a little after 3:30. And I'm seeing that there's actually, there's some comments watching on Facebook Live. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Nancy. It's so fun to see all these people. So it doesn't look like there's any questions, just nice feedback, which I appreciate very much. Is there anybody on, okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Stop share. We'll go back to the folks. Is there anybody on the Zoom call that has any specific questions? As I said, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes. Obviously, if you need to go, just sign off. Thank you so much for being here. Let me actually, before I move to that, share information. I will, what's the best way to do that? So my website is a great place to go. So that's Autism and EI, so all spelled out, AUTISMANDEI.com is my website. I'll be posting this on YouTube. So if you all want to go back and just kind of look at it, slow it down, back it up, that kind of thing. My YouTube channel is that as well, Autism and EI. You should just be able to put that in the search and have it come up. And I know there's something I am forgetting. And then there's my Facebook page. My Facebook page has to do with advocacy and autism and all of that stuff. So I have a page that you guys could get further resources. I have a group that's designed for parents that they can get. I put more sort of events that are going on for parents, support groups, and that kind of thing on that. So there's just a number of resources on Facebook. I'm trying to get information out there. If you go to YouTube, one of my hopes is that I will be able to provide more free trainings and information. If you guys go and watch and subscribe that will allow me to hopefully continue to provide these sort of services. And I think that's one of my big goals in terms of my work, is just to get this information out and make it accessible to anybody who needs it, parents, providers, etc. So please go on to Facebook and request to be friended, and I will friend you. And those are kind of the social media, YouTube stuff. And it's all autism and EI across the board. So if you need to sign off on Facebook Live, thank you so much for being here. I will repost it. And if anybody wants to stay on here at the Zoom meeting, I would love to answer any questions. So if you want to unmute, or if you have anything actually you'd like to add, and we have fabulous people here who've been here forever doing this work. So if there's anything that you'd like to add to this discussion, I'd love to, I'd love to have your input. Anybody?
This is Tony De Silva.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I have not heard about what is the role of the child themselves in this process. Because I figure you got to talk to the kid. What do you want, kid?
That is a great question. And thank you for bringing that up, because sometimes I forget that, again, because I work with little tiny tinies. Hi, Jocelyn. Thank you so much. I'll see you probably tomorrow, right? Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Jocelyn. It's a really good question, Tony. And I think as kids get older, there is a point, especially when we're talking about transition, I think that kids are asked to be at the table. I think, as they should be, right? There's nothing about us without us, right? So I think that when kids are younger, it is more probably a call on the adults, in terms of how involved or not that they are. I have 2 boys myself, and I ask them. They are certainly part of the conversation. I don't always feel like being at the IEP meeting is helpful. Sometimes the conversations are difficult.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're contentious, and I'm not sure that's always helpful for the child, the littler ones to be there. But certainly, as kids get older, and really, again, I think it's a parent choice and a young person's call. But my call would be that as soon as that child says, I want to be at the table, I think that they should be at the table. So I don't know. Did that answer your question? There's no law or anything about it, I don't think.
When you're dealing with people, there's no specific stuff that meets everyone.
Right.
I got that. What I'm thinking about, though, especially with the younger kids too, who have no idea what's going on, at least some explanation. We're going to be talking with your teacher. What would you like your teacher to know about you, etc.? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. And certainly once that IEP is designed, going through it with them, I think is really helpful. There's going to be all these people who support you. You're going to have somebody who's going to help you with this, and there's somebody going to help you with that. And these are the things that are going to be available to you anytime you need it, right? So that they feel like they're stepping in supported.
Right.
I would also say it's so critical that you make sure that teachers have read the IEPs. You'd be surprised. I just am stunned sometimes that nobody has read the IEPs. And sometimes things are veering off track because nobody has read the IEPs and none of the accommodations are in place. So sometimes kids can do a great job of advocating for themselves as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Great question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for being here, Tony. Anybody else? Michelle, I still see you on.
I'm still here. Thank you so much, Zoe.
You're welcome. Was it helpful? I felt like I went through it really fast, but
I think any kind of information about the IEP and the IEP process is always helpful. And the more we do it, the more we know how to ask questions and know more about it. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And I'll let you guys know I'm going to be doing more of these trainings, kind of live events. And so I'll let everybody know as they come up. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Heather. Bye, Tony. Bye, Vivian. Bye, Michelle.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye. If you'd like more information about autism and early intervention, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of the links are located below. Please like and subscribe to this channel to offer your support. It's much appreciated. Be well and take care.